All right, friends, welcome to lesson one, all about on camera buttons. So, in this lesson, you will learn your on camera buttons and what they do, your three manual mode buttons aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, how to locate and adjust white balance, how to locate autofocus modes and what this means, and how to locate metering modes and what they mean. So, this is just a quick disclaimer. These buttons and settings are for Nikon. Canon settings are similar, but you might need to use your camera manual to find the exact settings to see which settings are similar to Nikon. Mirrorless camera settings and buttons may be different. So if you are Sony, you might not have these same settings and buttons on your camera. So just be aware of that. You might need to break out the manual to see which settings and buttons are similar to Nikon. So let's first locate manual mode. So on the top of your camera, most DSLRs will have the green auto button that comes with your camera's factory settings. So what you're going to want to do is take it off of the auto at the top of your camera and turn it onto M. That M stands for manual mode, and this is how you will have full control over how your camera takes pictures. So you're taking it off of auto and onto manual, and this is going to be like your first step to just like greatness. So get excited. The next thing I'm going to have you do is locate three super important buttons. These three buttons are what make up the manual mode functions and will get you to have those professional looking pictures by the end of this course. So the first thing I'm going to have you locate is the aperture button, or in most cases, the aperture dial. So on my Nikon D610, D750, and D850, the aperture is adjusted by the front camera dial. So when you're holding your camera, your pointer finger is going to be resting on the aperture dial, and you can move that back and forth and get acquainted with your aperture dial. I know you don't know what that means yet, and that's totally fine. There's going to be a whole lesson on aperture, but for right now, I just want you to locate it. The next thing I need you to locate is your ISO button. So it is a button on all three of my Nikon cameras. So it's probably a button on Canon's, but you're going to look for the button with the simple letters ISO above it. And if you can see the picture, it's the second button from the bottom. That's your ISO button. You're going to hold that button down and you're going to turn the dial left and right, and that's how you adjust your ISO numbers. And like I said, there'll be a future lesson on this, so don't worry if you don't know what it means yet, but I just want you to locate the button. The third button I need you to locate, or actually the third dial, is the shutter speed dial. And this is probably something we're all familiar with, whether you are a photographer or not. It's the shutter speed dial. It is what your thumb will be resting on when you hold your camera, and it's the dial that you'll turn left and right, and that adjusts shutter speed. So locate those three super important buttons before you move on to the next slide. So the next super important button that I need you to locate is the WB button. This means white balance, and we have an entire module dedicated to this, but for now, I need you to just locate the button. You'll click it and then look either in your viewfinder, your LCD screen, or your info screen, and use your shutter dial to move it left and right. It might be your aperture dial depending on your camera body, but I want you to figure out, number one, where the button is, and number two, how to adjust it. Once you figured that out, you're good to go. We'll have a whole module about this one later. So the next button I want you to locate is the autofocus area mode button. This button on all three of my Nikon cameras is on the left side. So if you're holding the camera, you look underneath your left-hand fingers, you're gonna see this little button. next to your fingers, and it's going to be AF or M. Number one, make sure it's on AF. And then the second thing you want to do is you're going to want to click the button. It doesn't look like a button, but it's totally a button. So click the button, and I want you to look either through your viewfinder or on the back of your LCD screen. So this is a picture of me looking through my viewfinder. So I'm holding onto the button, I'm looking at the viewfinder, and I'm going to take my my right thumb and use the shutter dial to make sure that this area mode is on single point. So if you notice, I have an arrow and it's showing you that that should say S. Okay, so the first one should say AFS. That's going to mean single shot. The second one should say S, and that's going to mean single point focus. And what that means is that you see this other top arrow, that means you're going to only have one point that will focus in your image. And we're going to have a whole module about focus, so don't freak out. I want just to get your camera prepared for that module. So if you can make sure when you're holding that button, you look through your viewfinder, you make it to where you see AFS and then also another S that stands for single point focus. So you might also see that these four little dots, that means it's a group focus. We don't want that. We want the GRP to look like this S. So make sure you have one little dot, one little box, and that means it's on single point focus. Okay. Another thing we want to do is change the autofocus from AFS to AFC. We're going to be moving our autofocus back and forth and back and forth. And I know you don't know what this means yet, but I promise you will by the end of this module. But for now, I want to make sure that you have your autofocus on AFS and your single point to S. So it needs to look just like this inside of your camera, and if it does, you are good to go. So the next thing I want you to locate are metering modes, and this is actually going to be discussed in the very next module when we talk about exposure. For now, I just want you to locate it. So locate this little button. It kind of looks like a window. So what you'll do is you'll click the button, and you should be seeing on your info screen or through your viewfinder or your LCD screen, when you move the shutter, when you're holding that button, it should give you different options. It's going to look like a window, it's going to look like a bird's eye, and it's going to look like a dot. As long as you know how to change those and locate it, you're good to go. Locate metering modes. So here's some other buttons that I really want you to get familiar with. Obviously, the on and off button, that one's pretty important. The preview button, which is also like the play button, that's going to show you their images. The magnifying button, so those are the magnifying glasses to zoom in and zoom out. The info button, which is the little eye button on the back of your camera, all that does is give you all the information that you have manually adjusted in your camera. So it'll give you your aperture, your ISO, your shutter speed, it'll give you your white balance, it gives you all the information on the back of your camera. Live view is LV. What that does when you click a live view is that you don't have to look through your viewfinder anymore. You will see a live view of what your camera is seeing on the back of your LCD screen. Delete is obviously the trash can, and that does exactly what it does. It deletes your images. Your SD card slot is normally on the right side of your camera, so you can just slide that little door and you'll see your SD card slot. You'll slide it back closed, and then the very bottom of your camera should be your battery slot. So just make sure you get familiar with your camera. Like, don't be afraid to actually study what's going on. Like, we want to make sure we're super confident photographers. And one step to being closer to confidence is just knowing where your buttons are. So take some time, like pause this lesson, pause this module before you move on, and just like play around with the buttons of your camera so you can know exactly where everything is. You're not constantly looking, and it'll definitely help as we continue learning more and more and more throughout this course. So, in this lesson, you learned your on-camera buttons, what they do, your 3 manual mode buttons, aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, how to locate and adjust white balance, how to locate autofocus modes and what that means, and how to locate metering modes and what they mean. This was a big one.